Back on the TTSaleen. Look what came in the mail. Part number 5501218. It's the Terminator X. This looks like our main harness here. And then these are the coils. So we got these are our injector wires. These are our coil wires. Pretty easy. Labeled very nicely. This looks like our main power cable, red and black. Our display. Wideband oxygen sensor. The actual Terminator X. Manual. Some cool stickers. And warranty. So get this box out of the way. We'll lay all this out nice and neat, and I'll cut this open. All right, that's a new artist, Dorothy. Rest in peace. Had to mute it so YouTube doesn't ding my video. But here's the Terminator X. These are our coil drivers. This is our main power harness, Terminator X. Our display. Went over the wiring harness here. So now it's as simple as just getting it all installed in the car. Recommend going through the manual. And I'm going to go through here and figure out how I'm going to run my wires now, make it nice and neat. And as I told you, I've got to get my factory gauges to work. But for now, down and dirty, I'm probably just going to try to hook it all up real fast and make it run. One thing to note, they strongly recommend that you have to hook this main power harness directly to the battery. So don't be hooking it to your battery wire somewhere around the hood or in the dashboard of the car. They want you to hook this directly to the battery itself so you don't have any issues. So that means mine's in the trunk. I'll be running these batteries to the trunk and hooking it directly up there, but it says right here, connect directly to battery terminals. So a lot of people that have had problems just didn't follow that quick instruction. So make sure you do that for the best connection right out of the box. All right now I'm just starting to run the coil wire first. So here's the end of it. I'm just snaking it around on my car because it's gonna come through down here. So I plugged in 4, 3. This is number 2. Plugs in like this. Then number 1. Plug in here, like so. Line it up. Okay. Now everything's plugged in nice and neat. Now just kind of put this wire in here, right? Something like that. Come back, straighten it up. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is how it runs. And now, because my car is a little more complicated than the average one, like this. Of course, that's all gonna fall down. All my fuel stuff's in the way. I need to kind of run this around where it won't be intrusive, because we've got boost controllers and throttle cables and stuff in the way, and fuel. Get all this over. So let me try to run this a little neater, but then these will plug in the same way for the coils, and we'll go from there. Now what I plan on doing is on the SN cars, for example, the harness goes right here through this rubber plug. So if you pull it away from the car, you'll see there's a hole right there. I'm gonna try to see if I can feed the connectors through and drop them down inside here. So if I can do that, that's where I'm gonna run my wires through. So I'll drop them down through this hole here, which is effectively right down in there. That should give me plenty of room to run my wires down. All right, I stripped my factory harness apart, and I got the wire from the alternator and the main power wire here. And basically I've got them running down and it plugs in right here. The main wire goes to there, and the other one, you can see it, it actually plugs in right here. So it goes right up here to the back of the alternator, so I can use the factory connections. Now we'll see if that's gonna work. I don't know if it's gonna work. I'm trying to use all the factory connections that I can right now and figure it out. Of course, there's nothing in the manual about it, but this is the big wire that runs from the back of the alternator all the way down, plugs onto here to this terminal fuse block. We'll see if that's actually gonna work or not. If it doesn't, probably have to jump our wire in here to excite the alternator. But for now, we're gonna try it this way and see. I did run my harness. I got it to both sides evenly and ran around the back of the motor. And the plug is actually right here, just about in the middle, back of the motor. And what I'm gonna try to do is I'm gonna try to run the harness through that plug, but the harness is so big, I've got a lot of little connectors to run, because if not, I've got to run these big connectors through, and that's going to be a pain. So I think I'm going to try to run the little connectors through there, see if we can make it work. But gotta pull all this down out of the way first, see if I can fish it through there, because I'm going to try to leave most of the factory stuff in place for now, and we'll see what we can do here. All right, so I had to think about this last night. I got my wires pulled through, and I was trying to figure out these connections here. And what was weird is this connection, you can clearly see it, it says crank. But if you know Ford's, Ford has a crank sensor. It's a 2-wire connection. And it looks like this. This is the type of connection it is, and this looks exactly like the connector that you would need. However, on my harness, this says knock. But if you think about it, like a 4-valve Mach motor has 2 knock sensors that mount under the intake here on the block, and you would need basically 4 wires, which is what this is, 4 wires. 2 for one sensor, 2 for the other. And it's short because technically you'd have this under the intake. So anyway, I called up my buddy Logan, Fastlane, because he's got Holley harnesses and stuff. And he sent me a picture, and wouldn't you know it, his connector looks just like this. His sticker on it, this says knock. And this one that says knock on mine actually says crank. So I think somebody at Holley, they must have made this one on a Friday afternoon before they left for the weekend, or they made it Monday morning when they were still hungover from the weekend. They just put the sticker in the wrong place. This knock decal should be on this, and this crank decal should be on here. So this one actually goes to the crank, which makes sense. It's really long. It'll go all the way down here to the front of the motor. And now I can move ahead, because that was really stumping me last night. I figured, how am I supposed to get this to the crank? Because it's not only is it not going to reach, it's not going to fit. It's wrong. But as you can tell, I've ran the wires up through here. I ran them up through the fender well, and I ended up having to drill a hole right here and run my wires through. I couldn't go through the factory plug here. It was just too tight. So I did a 2-inch hole, put some rubber grommet around it, and ran my harness through there. And it was really tight with the harness, but it's through there now. And then I ran over through this hole and came out with my harness and ran my coil wires behind here, and they run around. This is my fuel injection wiring harness. We got my IAC, which is plugged in down here. It actually mounts under the intake. And all my fuel stuff I gotta get out of the way. I need to go ahead and put the intake on it, and then I can hook up all the other various connections here, like the coolant temp sensor. This is the MAT sensor, manifold absolute temperature. And this is the fuel pressure. This cam sensor, which on mine is right here on this side of the head. And then this is the oil pressure sensor. And that should be about it for these. Pretty easy at this point to hook those up. and we'll go from there. So just wanted to show you, did have a little delay. Somebody mislabeled my harness. I was looking through the book. I'm like, where in the world does this hook up? Also have these as part of my harness. These are what they call the ignition coil drivers. You see how the plugs are on it? So I'm assuming in the harness there's connections on the other end. I basically should just be able to plug these in and go. So getting there, these are the parts that's left over that I'll have to hook up. These are for the injectors, that's the wideband, and we'll get there. So I have a water temp sensor, which looks like the one in my left hand on the front. That's what the Holley's plugging into. And at the back here, I had a water switch sensor, and that looked like that. See how they look different? So because I want to run my factory gauge, I need a water temp sensor, not a switch sensor. So I'm actually taking the switch sensor out, and I just got a new water temp sensor. I'm gonna put it back here. Unfortunately, when I just pulled out, water leaks. I've gotta soak all that up now. I'm gonna put a little Teflon paste on here, put that in the hole, and then my factory wiring harness will plug into this. This is some of that redundant stuff I was talking about. For my fuel pressure, I actually put a little T-fitting here, and I've got my autometer sensor plugged in here and my Holley plugged in there, but that's how I did that. At the bottom down here, where my oil filter is, I have the same thing. I have a T adapter, and I have my sensor plugged in, one for the factory sensor and one for the Holley. All right, the T-fitting I used is a nitrous oxide 16775. And basically I've been weeding out the factory harness. So this is the factory harness. And when I say weeding out, what I did was I cut out everything that wasn't pertinent to this new install, which was the injector plugs and harness, the coil wires and harness, all that stuff I basically cut out. And that is what's laying over here in a pile. So what I'm trying to do is figure out if I can still use this stuff to get my everything else to work. It may not work, but that's the factory plug here. And then this runs over. So the original water temp gauge that went here, it's now plugged in back here. The water temp switch is just laying there. I'm not gonna use it. This is the Holley coolant temp sensor plugged in where the factory one was. And let's see what else is pertinent here. This wire goes down to my AC clutch. Again, using all the factory stuff. I'll probably have to go back in here and do something different, but for now I'm just trying to have all the factory connectors and wires, and later on if I need to change it, at least I'll have the wires coming up here where I can grab onto them. You know, just doing everything I can for now. But I'm getting ready to loom them back up, make them neat. I'm just trying to lay them out now where they look somewhat directional. Trying to figure out if I can lay them under the intake before I put it back on. But yeah, I don't need this as the AC, or this is the water temp switch. And I don't really need it. I could cut it out, but I might just leave it in the harness for now. I mean, again, the factory computer's not running anything, so I could probably go ahead and cut it out and just save the space. And then this was connected to something. I don't even remember what that was connected to. But anyway, weeding it out. Again, trying to use the factory connection, which went from this block here and then over to there. So we'll see. Might be just a worthless exercise that I'm doing, but I'd like to try to keep as much of the factory wiring in the car just to keep circuits connected that I can to get the dash to work without getting under the dash and rewiring it. So maybe out here I can make it work. All right, so I'm doing today, pulling out some more old wires, hooking up my loose wires. Loose wires are on page 13 here. You got your red and white, which is your switch 12, your red joined to the battery, green to the fuel pump. So what I'm doing is I've tied my red and green, twist them together. Got to run them back here to the back. I've already run the main red and black power wires back here. They're actually coming up. Let's see if I can get those. They're actually right here. So I can get those and terminate them onto the battery in my battery box here. This is my fuel pump relay there for triple pumps that I've got. And so I need to send the signal back here and basically use that. I've got a relay down here that actually sends a signal to the first side and it triggers it, and then when I get into boost it actually has a Hobbs switch which turns on the other two pumps. Anyway, I had a key on from before that sent 12 volts back. I'm going to disable that, and that's going to run off the green wire, and then the red wire is connected to 12 volts all the time to the battery. So I'm going to run these wires through the car, under the carpet like I did the main power, up and under, through here under the back seat, and then back here. That'll take care of some of the loose wires. All right, getting closer. Got the coils hooked up and the wiring on this side and the cover on it. Moved around to this side, pulled the plugs out, putting Melvin's secret sauce here down in the cylinders to make sure if I did wash the rings off all that gas in it, maybe this will help, you know, fix that problem. So I'm gonna do now is see if I can adjust the camera so you can see what I'm working on. So just put a little bit of oil in here, like this. Don't need much, just a little bit, like so. Let that drain down in there real good. Got basically a vacuum hose run all the way down through the spark plug hole right on top of the piston. Putting that oil down in there. This is just not regular oil like you run the engine. This is some of Melvin's secret sauce when he builds an engine. So I'm gonna put that in each cylinder, put the spark plugs back in it, put the coils on it, the wires, the coil cover. Then I gotta finish tightening down the intake and the torque sequence. And it's coming along, getting close. Tidy up all my wires and stuff here out of the way. And the only thing left to do is the key on wire and the tack wire. And we should be ready to fire this thing up after I terminate the wires at the battery. Everything else is ran and ready to go. All right, so today, Rock Auto showed up with the new pigtail adapter wiring harness I needed, which is going to plug into my mat sensor located back here on the back of my intake manifold. And then these are two 70 amp relays that I got from Summit Racing, and these are going to go to each one of the wires from my electric fans. And I have to extend the wires from the Holley. They only ran out to right here, so I've got to extend these over, and it triggers the ground side of the relays. So I'll hook these up, and when the Holley triggers it, it'll turn on one or both fans. Well, got a little bit of an issue here. So I'm actually running the Holley mat sensor, which is the air temp sensor. And unfortunately mine, the basic programming for the Ford is set up for the Ford sensor, and it's not reading how the scaling's wrong on it. So it's in the red. It shows the temperature is 182 degrees, which is way too hot in the intake manifold. So it's in the red right here, and there's no way to change that in the wizard, in the handheld with this. So what I have to do is I actually have to go into the main tune into the actual ECU. Unfortunately, to do that you need a USB cable that actually attaches where the handheld plugs in. It's a special cable that Holley makes. It doesn't come with the kit, I found out. I had to buy it. It's 65 bucks. So it won't be here till tomorrow. So unfortunately, I'm not even gonna try to crank the car until I have the right cable, because I have to go in there and change the scaling on that air temp sensor to match so it's in spec. But that gives me time to go ahead and wire up my relays. But the good thing is I've got my sensor and all in there in the intake manifold. I already have my plug changed over. It's nice and neat, heat shrink changed over, so it is plugged in now. It looks factory. So all the wiring is completed and done for the actual engine to crank and run. I just haven't tried to do that yet. The only thing left to do now is to wire in the relays for the electric fan which I can do here. And I did download the Holley software on my computer, so I actually see the base tune files and all. You pull the chip out of the side of the handheld there, and you can see some of the base tuning files and all. So it's not that hard to do, but you need to have the cable from your computer plugged into the ECU, so you can actually, when you make the changes, they'll save into the computer. So anyway, that's what I have to do next. Change the scaling and all, basically write my own custom tune file, and then it'll be good to go. But right now, doing the Wizard, it just wasn't getting it done, just because this sensor is not the factory forward one. Called Holley Tech, told them what was going on, said, man, this sensor's reading 182 degrees and the motor's cold. Clearly it's not 182 degrees, and the scaling is what's off. So we're getting close, little nuances you run into. I really want to try to crank it, but I'm not even gonna try to do that yet until I get to that point. And you notice my fuel pumps aren't running. I don't want to run the risk of flooding the engine. So right here is my relay from 4 that runs my 3 fuel pumps. I literally just unplug this connection here, and the fuel pumps will not run while I'm keying it on each time. So one more day till I get my cable, and we should be able to get this thing fired up. Now I had to overnight this in here. This is a USB CAN harness, and I have to have this to plug in and place some of my little handheld display so I can actually save a custom tune to the car, which I need this to tell it what kind of sensor I have there, the air temp sensor. So let me get this hooked up and we'll go into the tune real quick, and then I should be able to light this thing off. £10 injectors. That's not bad. Motor's all right. It's just burning out oil out the exhaust. Yeah, she's fat. It says it's like 11.0. Air fuel, it's like 11.5, 11.7, starting to go up. So I wonder if there's something in the cold start I can probably adjust. See, it's getting up to 12.
Yeah, you should be able to mess with all that.
I bet it's something when it's starting to warm up, it's starting to get there.
You should see warm up enrichment in there somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going up. Sweet. Well, here's an update for tonight. It is 8:30 on November the 10th. The car runs. Had a little bit of an issue where the temperature gauge in the car wasn't working. I think I figured that out. It has an air pocket in it. It is not circulating water. So I pulled my Terminator X display out so I could see the temperature. And it was reading the temperature from the Holley gauge on the front, but not my temperature gauge, which I actually moved to the back here in this pipe. and it's not circulating. So car's getting up temperature up here and turn on the fans like it's supposed to, and they're working great. And it's never coming up out here. It's not even like bubbling or circulating. So it's not circulating, which tells me it's not pumping, which means there's a big ass air pocket in there. So when I took that sensor loose back there and drained the water, somehow or another I've introduced a huge air pocket in the system. So I thought just by filling it up from here it should fix it, but it did not. So I've tried to go in here and blow some air through it and try to fix it, but it didn't fix it. So I've got I'm gonna drain some water out of it and try to put some hot water in it and top it back off and get it fixed. But for now, that's the only real issue to deal with. In the tune, it had a lot of fuel enrichment down low when you first crank it. And so when I went in, I just took the fuel enrichment and dropped it down so where it wouldn't add that fuel enrichment. And it's actually trying to idle now in the 12s to 13s where it should. And I turned back on closed loop. I had it turned off and it didn't like it. So I turned back on closed loop and actually cranks, runs. All the other gauges work, it's charging. So everything I did, making the factory harness and weeding it out, as I was saying, works. This is my booster spark from the old combo. I gotta pull it out of here. I don't know if I'll be able to use it or not, but for now I'm gonna just take it out of the way, have some wires to tidy up, make them look nice and neat. But right now, one fan turns on, then the other fan turns on, so they're working fine. Everything actually works the way it's supposed to. All my sensors are working. I was able to get my air temp sensor working, fuel pressure gauges, oil pressure, everything works just like it's supposed to. And the car actually starts right up and holds fuel pressure, no leaks with the injectors or nothing like that. So my buddy Buckley was able to stop by, and he actually was here for the first startup, which was kind of cool. I did identify that the rods seemed to be okay. The motor idles nice and smooth, didn't feel any vibrations. So I think I dodged a bullet there with hydrolocking the motor for all that gas, which is a win. The motor sounds healthy, seems to run good. Had some extra smoke at first because I'd put some oil down in the cylinders Melvin gave me to lube it up since I feel like I'd washed out all the rings. And it was smoking more and it started warming up because it was just overly rich. Good thing I was checking temperatures. I don't want to overheat the motor since it clearly had an air pocket in it. So I was only running it for a little bit and turned it off and run it and turn it off. And so now I've got to figure that air pocket out, get it where it's circulating. When it circulates water back to that sensor, I guarantee you my water temp sensor is going to work in here. Then everything will be perfect and running good. I can drive it around so it can try to do some learning on its own. And once I get it where it's actually drivable, then I can actually get some tuning done on this thing. And from there, I've got like over half a tank of 93. I want to run all that out. I'm just going to switch the tune to E85 and get it where it's running on E85. And then I'm going to actually get on the dyno and get some real tuning done on it so we can actually have it where it's top notch. This is everything I'm doing now is just preliminary, getting it where I can drive it. I have no intentions of leaving it like this. I want a real tune for the car because I don't trust this thing just for a guess, you know what I mean? I am not a tuner. So don't let the shirt fool you. We got the shirt now, we got the car up and running. I'm happy my project's back together. This car was designed and built back in 2008 and 2009. It's amazing this car is still valid after all these years, and now it's got an updated computer system for it. Motor runs great. Can't wait to get it back on the road and drive it around with this new combination. And it's gonna be a street fighter once again with the 6-speed manual. But sooner or later, I'll get around to actually spend money on what I should have, which, you know, again, you gotta fix all these problems, you got all these other projects, but putting an automatic in here, a Turbo 400, which is what the car is gonna get next time I go around with it. And then we'll take the car back to the track and see what all these improvements have done. And hopefully by then it'll go faster than the 580 that it went. I have a feeling it'll be much deeper in the fives and much higher than the 123 miles an hour that it went before. So stay tuned. But the good news is the car does run. It does have a Terminator X. The motor's not hurt. New computer system. All the gauges work just like I wanted. I will have to go in here though. It was funny. The check engine light was on, which that's pretty hilarious. But hey, everything works, so kudos. Talk to you soon.